Section 1. Where it all began. The origins nobody talks about settle in. Get comfortable. Maybe pull a blanket over yourself, close your eyes partway, and just let the words wash over you. Because what we are doing right now is taking a very long, very slow, very relaxed walk through 100 Easter eggs, hidden facts, secret references, and behind-the-scenes moments from Rick and Morty. Some of these you might already know. Some will hit you like a quiet little revelation. All of them are the kind of thing that once you hear it, reshapes the way you see the show. So let us begin at the beginning, at the very roots of where this strange, brilliant, sometimes heartbreaking show actually came from. Before we get into the facts themselves, it is worth taking a moment to appreciate what kind of show Rick and Morty actually is. On the surface, it is a wild science fiction comedy about a drunk genius and his nervous grandson going on impossible adventures. That is all true. That is also the least interesting thing about it. Underneath that, it is a show about family, about the specific damage that brilliant and broken people inflict on the people closest to them, about whether love can coexist with harm, and about the universe's stubborn indifference to whether any of it matters. It is also, underneath all of that, genuinely one of the funniest things ever produced. The comedy and the heartbreak are not separate channels. They are the same signal. The show makes you laugh and then makes you realize the laughter was covering something, and then makes you laugh again before you can fully process what just happened. That duality, comedy and genuine weight, absurdity and real human pain, is what makes it worth spending this much time with. 100 facts about a lesser show would feel like homework. 100 facts about this one feel like company. Let us begin. Fact 1. The entire concept of Rick and Morty began with a joke that was not even supposed to be a real show. Back in 2006, Justin Roiland was producing content for Channel 101, a monthly short film festival in Los Angeles that Dan Harmon had co-founded. Roiland had recently had a project canceled, one he described as intensely draining and creatively suffocating. And he channeled all of that restless frustration into a new web short. What he created was a deliberately crude, intentionally offensive parody of Back to the Future. He called it The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty. The characters were named Doc and Marty rather than Doc and Marty, a thin legal shield to avoid copyright trouble. The dialogue was intentionally slurred and rambling. It was, in Harmon's own words years later, a pornographic vandalization of a beloved film. But underneath all the shock value, Roiland was experimenting with something that would become the bedrock of the show, the dynamic of an unhinged genius dragging an anxious, unprepared young person into dangerous situations. That energy, that specific push and pull, was already alive in that scrappy little short. It would take 6 more years to become Rick and Morty, but the heartbeat was already there. Fact 2. Before Rick and Morty, and before that Back to the Future parody, Justin Roiland had made something even more gloriously strange called House of Cosbys. This was a short animated series about a man who cloned Bill Cosby over and over, resulting in a house full of Cosby clones, each with different abilities. It debuted at the Channel 101 festival, the same festival that Dan Harmon had co-founded, which is actually how Harmon first became aware of Roiland's work. They connected over a shared love of weird, wrong, deeply committed, absurdist humor. House of Cosbys was eventually shut down by a cease and desist letter from Bill Cosby's lawyers, which ended the project almost immediately. But the shutdown forced Roiland to redirect his creative energy, and that redirection led directly to the Doc and Marty parody, which led directly to Rick and Morty. In a strange, circuitous way, Bill Cosby's lawyers may be partially responsible for one of the greatest animated series ever made. Fact 3. The show's theme song, that spacey, slightly ominous, instantly recognizable piece of music that plays over the opening credits, was not composed specifically for Rick and Morty. It was borrowed from an entirely different, unfinished project that Roiland had been working on called Dog World. This was a Cartoon Network pitch about humans living alongside intelligent dogs, and it never got made. The concept sat unfinished, shelved, going nowhere. But the theme music Roiland had developed for it stayed with him. When Rick and Morty came together, that music found its home. The same eerie, propulsive melody that was supposed to soundtrack a world of sentient dogs instead became the opening note of one of the most celebrated animated shows of the modern era. Roiland's failed projects had an interesting way of feeding directly into his successful ones. The bones of one thing kept becoming the foundation of the next. Fact. 4. The show first aired on December 2nd, 2013, and it did not immediately explode in popularity. The early audience was modest. Ratings were decent, but not groundbreaking. Nobody predicted that this show about a drunk genius and his anxious grandson would become the kind of cultural force that it became. The slow burn growth is actually part of what gave the show such a devoted fan base. People found it on their own, recommended it to friends quietly, rewatched episodes, and caught new details each time. It was a show that rewarded attention, and that quality drew in exactly the kind of viewers who were going to dedicate enormous amounts of time to theorizing, cataloging Easter eggs, and building an entire culture around it. In May 2018, after years of contract negotiations, Adult Swim announced a landmark deal with the creators, ordering 70 new episodes of the show over an unspecified number of seasons. This was an extraordinary expression of confidence in the property. Most television shows are renewed season by season, with the renewal depending on the performance of the preceding season. Rick and Morty was being given a 70-episode commitment in a single announcement, an acknowledgement that the show had become something beyond a normal television property. It was a cultural institution. The deal was later extended further, with the series renewed through a 12th season as of a 2024 New York Comic-Con panel announcement. The show that nobody predicted would succeed was eventually guaranteed a run of content extending well into the 2020s. Fact 5. The family in Rick and Morty lives outside of Seattle, Washington. This is actually confirmed by Justin Roiland, who stated it in an interview. The Pacific Northwest setting does a lot of quiet work in the background of the show. It explains the gray, overcast quality of many outdoor scenes. It gives the suburban backdrop a specific, slightly damp, slightly melancholy feeling. The Smith house feels like it exists in a real place, which is part of why the contrast between the ordinary domestic life and the insane interdimensional adventures hits as hard as it does. Fact 6. The names Rick and Morty are themselves a loving nod to their origin in the Back to the Future parody. Rick is derived from Doc, who in the original films is a wild-haired eccentric scientist played with enormous energy. Morty is derived from Marty McFly, the reluctant young companion dragged into chaos. Over time, the characters developed entirely separate identities and backstories that have almost nothing to do with Back to the Future, but that original DNA is still quietly present. Rick's wild hair and lab coat, Morty's nervous energy and tendency to be the moral anchor in impossible situations. The skeleton is still Back to the Future, even though the flesh and soul of these characters is something entirely different and entirely original. Fact 7. One of the most persistent facts about the show's aesthetic comes from art director Jeffrey Thompson, who explained that the characters are often drawn with deliberately odd or asymmetrical features. The goal was to make sure nobody looked too normal to exist in the Rick and Morty universe. The show's visual identity is built around a kind of casual weirdness, a sense that even the ordinary things are slightly off. The suburban house looks slightly wrong. The school looks slightly strange. The humans have proportions that are just subtly unusual. This was entirely intentional. And the drooping mouths that characters make when they are confused or shocked are a direct homage to John Kricfalusi's Ren and Stimpy show, where Ren would make the exact same expression. Roiland has acknowledged this connection multiple times. Fact 8. The animation for the show is done using a program called Toon Boom Harmony, with post-production handled in Adobe After Effects and background art created in Adobe Photoshop. From Season 7 onwards, a studio in Kilkenny, Ireland, called Lighthouse Studios has been animating 5 of every 10 episodes in each season. The relationship began at the Annecy International Film Festival in France, where Lighthouse's executive producers essentially convinced Adult Swim to give them a shot. One of the producers later admitted she had not even heard of Rick and Morty when the conversation first happened, but did not let that show. Lighthouse went on to become integral to the show's production. There is something quietly wonderful about the fact that a show so deeply American in its sensibilities is partly being brought to life in a converted seminary in an Irish city. The Kilkenny studio, called Lighthouse Studios, is housed in a building with Gothic architecture that once served as a seminary. Generations of priests studied there. Now the hallways that once echoed with theological study echo with the sound of animators bringing Rick Sanchez to life. One single episode can take 15 or 16 weeks to complete animation from start to finish. The teams can be working on as many as 6 different episodes simultaneously at any given point. Each 11 or 22-minute episode might see an individual animator personally responsible for only a single minute of the final product. Yet every frame of that minute carries the full weight of their creative attention. Section 2. Rick Sanchez, the deepest secrets of the smartest man alive. Fact 9. Rick's famous catchphrase, the one that sounds like pure celebratory nonsense, is one of the most quietly devastating things in the show. Wubba Luba Dub Dub was introduced in Season 1, Episode 5, when Rick is making a joke about the Meeseeks box and turns to the audience to announce that this is going to be his new catchphrase. It sounds like joy. It sounds like enthusiasm. It sounds like the kind of thing a cartoon character shouts when something goes well. But in Episode 11 of that same season, Bird Person, Rick's oldest and closest friend, pulls Morty aside at a party and reveals what the phrase actually means. In Bird Person's native language, Wooba Looba Doob Dub translates to, "I am in great pain, please help me." Rick has been announcing his suffering to everyone around him, every single time, using a phrase that is designed to look like its opposite. The people who laughed did not understand what they were hearing. Even the fans who were repeating the catchphrase, yelling it in public, putting it on merchandise, were carrying a cry for help without realizing it. That one fact reshapes the entire first season retroactively. Fact 10. The Rick we follow throughout the show is not any Rick. He is a very specific Rick from a very specific dimension. He is Rick C. 137. This designation matters enormously for the show's deeper lore. Rick C. 137 is unique among all the Ricks across the multiverse for several reasons that the show only gradually reveals. He is the Rick who originally helped design the central finite curve. He is the Rick who lost his wife and daughter to another version of himself, a more ruthless Rick, who is referred to in later seasons as Rick Prime. He is the Rick who spent years building a portal gun from scratch, not because he was handed the technology, but because his grief gave him direction. Every other Rick in the multiverse had the portal gun technology shared with them or discovered it alongside the formation of the Citadel. Our Rick built it alone, powered by loss. Fact 11. Rick has a photo of Doofus Rick framed in his garage, and it is visible in the background of the first episode of Season 3. Doofus Rick, for those who may not remember, is a variant of Rick from another dimension who is described by the other Ricks as the worst, most embarrassing version of Rick in the multiverse. He is kind, gentle, has no technical brilliance to speak of, and is apparently known for eating his own feces, which is genuinely one of the more surreal details the show ever casually drops. Despite this reputation, Jerry was the only Smith who ever genuinely connected with Doofus Rick, forming a brief but warm friendship during the episode where the Ricks strand all the Jerrys in a daycare facility. The fact that Rick has Doofus Rick's photo framed suggests complicated feelings, a kind of horrified affection, or perhaps a reminder of what he might have been. Fact 12. Rick's gray-blue hair is not a random design choice. In the original Doc and Marty short, the character based on Doc Brown had wild, gray, Einstein-like hair that was clearly meant to evoke Christopher Lloyd's iconic look from Back to the Future. When Rick Sanchez was designed as a separate, original character, the gray hair remained as a genetic memory of that origin, but the blue tint was added. The blue-gray combination also subtly echoes the portal fluid, the green-tinged substance that drips from the corner of Rick's mouth. These small design details connect Rick's physical appearance to his science and his technology in a way that makes him feel like a man who has literally been shaped by what he does. Fact 13. In the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, when Rick transfers his consciousness into a teenage clone of himself to go undercover at Morty and Summer's school, Tiny Rick becomes immediately disturbingly popular. He is funny, charismatic, musically gifted, and effortlessly cool. But as Summer begins to notice, something is deeply wrong. Tiny Rick keeps trying to send them messages through his song lyrics. Lyrics about being trapped, about needing rescue, about a dark thing under the surface. The songs are a real, genuine cry from Rick's actual consciousness, which is being suppressed by the instincts of a teenage brain that just wants to have fun and not think about anything heavy. The episode is a very pointed look at how adolescents can chemically suppress the kind of self-awareness and existential reckoning that the adult mind can no longer avoid. Rick is literally fighting against his own teenage brain's desire to just enjoy the moment. Fact 14. The time travel stuff box in Rick's garage is one of the show's most quietly meta Easter eggs. Fans who pause on the right frame can see it sitting on a shelf, labeled simply time travel stuff, implying that Rick has the technology and the materials for time travel, but has deliberately chosen not to use or develop it. This is the show's way of explaining its own creative choice. Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland have both spoken publicly about their disdain for time travel as a storytelling device, arguing that it creates paradoxes that either have to be addressed constantly or ignored, neither of which is satisfying. By literally putting time travel stuff in a box and putting it on a shelf, the show is making its position visually explicit. Rick could do it. He just does not, because time travel makes everything messy. The box is a meta joke that also functions as a piece of genuine in-universe world-building. Fact 15. Rick's near-suicide at the end of the episode, Autoerotic Assimilation, is one of the most harrowing moments in the entire series, and it lands so hard partly because of what comes before it. The episode involves Rick reconnecting with Unity, a hive mind entity who was apparently once in a romantic relationship with Rick. Unity leaves Rick at the end of the episode because Rick's negative influence consistently destroys everything he touches. He is, as Unity implies, a chaos agent whose presence cannot coexist with stability. After Unity leaves, the show cuts to Rick in his garage, having built a crude death ray pointed at himself. He feeds and euthanizes a small creature he kept. He sits down under the beam and passes out from drinking just before it fires. The beam narrowly misses him. The camera holds on his unconscious body. Then the episode ends, no speech, no comfort, no resolution. Just a drunk, lonely old man who almost ended his life, and a ray that almost found its mark. Fact 16. Rick's actual age within the show has never been fully nailed down, and this ambiguity is deliberate. In one episode, he is referred to as 80 years old by Principal Vagina, but this is treated as an estimate. In other contexts, calculations based on Beth's age and the timeline of the show suggest he could be as young as 51 in terms of lived experience. The ambiguity matters because Rick has lived in ways that defy linear chronology. He has jumped between dimensions. He has cloned himself. He has backed up his consciousness and transferred it into new bodies. The question of how old Rick actually is has a genuinely complicated answer that the show will likely never fully pin down, and that seems intentional. Rick exists outside the normal rules of time and age the same way he exists outside most other rules. Fact 17. Rick was once a guitarist. This is never directly stated in the show, but is established through background details and throwaway moments. A photo at Bird Person's house shows Rick in a band with Bird Person and Squanchy, a band apparently called the Flesh Curtains. In another episode, Tiny Rick writes and performs a complete song on short notice. In a Season 3 episode, Rick is seen noodling on a guitar while composing what he calls doo-doo butt. The show never makes a big deal of this. It never dedicates an episode to Rick's musical past. But through these scattered glimpses, a picture forms of a younger Rick who had a creative, artistic side alongside the scientific genius, a side that was apparently abandoned or suppressed somewhere along the way. Music as an expression of the self that Rick used to have more access to. Fact 18. The green drool that occasionally appears at the corner of Rick's mouth is one of the most visually distinctive and deliberately disgusting details in his character design. It is almost always associated with drunkenness or exhaustion, a visual shorthand for his relationship with alcohol. But some fans have pointed out that the green drool's color matches exactly the green portal fluid used in the portal gun, and the green fluid Rick tends to drink from flasks and bottles throughout the show. Whether intentional or not, the implication is interesting. The substance Rick uses to fuel his greatest technology is also the substance slowly leaking out of him. His genius and his addiction are literally the same color. The drool is also a callback, a somewhat gentler callback, to the original Doc and Marty short, where the Doc character's physical deterioration was used as crude comedy. In Rick and Morty, the drool is less prominent and less grotesque, but still present, a thread connecting the finished show back to its rough, unpolished origin. There is something almost nostalgic about it, a smear of what the show used to be before it figured out what it wanted to say. One more detail about Rick's design that rarely gets discussed: his eyebrows. Rick has a single thick unibrow that sits heavy over his eyes, and the unibrow communicates an extraordinary range of emotion. The animators have described using Rick's brow as one of the primary tools for expressing his internal state, particularly in moments where his dialogue is calm or dismissive, but his face is doing something else entirely. A tightening of the brow during a conversation where Rick is being cheerful tells the audience that the cheerfulness is performance. A relaxation of the brow in a quiet moment tells the audience that Rick's guard is down. The unibrow is the tell. It is the one part of his face that Rick cannot control with his words. Section 3. Morty, Summer, and the Hidden Architecture of the Smith Family. Fact 19. Morty Smith is 14 years old throughout the show, but the version of Morty that we follow from Season 2 onwards is technically not the same Morty from the pilot. This is an established, in-universe fact. In the Season 1 episode Rick Potion No. 9, Rick's love serum goes disastrously wrong and transforms virtually every human being on Earth into a horrifying, shambling, mutant creature. Rick cannot fix it. Rather than attempt to undo the damage, Rick drags Morty to an alternate dimension where they have just died in an explosion, and he instructs Morty to bury their own dead bodies in the backyard and take over their lives. They are now living in a different dimension, wearing the skin of deceased alternate versions of themselves. The Morty we follow from that point on is technically Morty Prime, who has replaced Morty C-131. This means the family that Morty lives with from Season 2 forward are also technically not his original family. They are alternate versions who are almost identical and who never know the difference. Fact 20. Morty's nervous stammering, those constant half-sentences and voice cracks, were originally all improvised by Justin Roiland when he recorded the character. Roiland has described Morty's voice as something that emerged naturally from experimentation, rather than being designed ahead of time. The anxiety expressed through Morty's speech patterns was not something the writers described in the scripts initially. It came from Roiland feeling his way into the character, finding the rhythm of someone who is permanently slightly overwhelmed. After Roiland left the show and Harry Belden took over the role beginning with Season 7, the show's production team began scripting the stammers and pauses with considerable precision, writing them directly into the dialogue so that they could maintain that quality without requiring an actor to improvise them. The thing that felt most natural and unscripted was eventually formalized into the text itself. Fact 21. Morty has an officially acknowledged learning disability within the show's universe. Multiple characters across multiple episodes reference it, and his academic performance consistently reflects it. But Morty's teachers and classmates consistently underestimate him in ways that miss the actual picture. Morty has developed, through his adventures with Rick, a genuine practical intelligence, a crisis management capability, and an emotional resilience that most of his peers cannot match. He knows how to handle weapons. He understands interdimensional physics at a functional level. He can navigate alien environments and political situations that would paralyze adults. His disability affects his performance in a conventional educational setting, but has almost no bearing on his real capabilities. The show uses this as a quiet commentary on how institutions measure intelligence and how badly those measurements can miss the point. Fact 22. The episode Total Recall in Season 2, where the family is trapped in their house trying to identify parasitic aliens that implant false memories, works on a fascinating structural logic that most viewers absorb intuitively before consciously realizing why. The parasites can only create positive memories. They cannot generate memories of conflict, frustration, or genuine difficulty with a person. This means that the only way to identify a real person versus a parasite is to recall a bad memory involving them. Every real character in the show has memories of conflict attached to them. Jerry's memories are full of embarrassments and petty failures. Rick's are full of danger and moral compromise. Beth's are complicated by resentment. The only character who initially seems to have all positive memories is Mr. Poopy Butthole, which makes him look exactly like a parasite. Beth shoots him. He is not a parasite. His goodness was simply real. Fact 23. Summer's origin story, the fact that she was an unplanned pregnancy and that her parents came close to not having her, is delivered to her in one of the most emotionally precise scenes the show has produced. The episode 60 Minutes uses the device of alternate dimension TV to explore what Beth and Jerry's lives would have looked like if they had not gotten pregnant with Summer. Both of them turn out to be extraordinary, fulfilled people in those alternate timelines. Beth becomes a respected surgeon. Jerry becomes a famous actor. When Summer finds the interdimensional goggles and watches these versions of her parents thriving, she begins to pack her bags, intending to run away because she understands she was, on some level, a mistake. The scene that follows, where Morty stops her and makes his speech about how neither of them are truly from this dimension anymore, is one of the most honest and quietly devastating moments the show has ever delivered. Fact 24. Beth Smith is a horse surgeon, not a human surgeon. The show makes this clear early on and consistently uses it as a source of Beth's low-grade resentment about her life. She is brilliant enough to be a real surgeon, to operate on people, to save human lives. But she got pregnant in high school, did not have the support structure to pursue that path, and ended up channeling her skills into equine medicine instead. What makes this detail genuinely haunting is the reason she did not have that support structure. Rick had already abandoned her. He left when she was young. There was no parent to help her navigate an unexpected pregnancy. The career Beth ended up with, the one she holds in mild, unspoken contempt, is the direct and traceable result of her father's absence. Her daily professional dissatisfaction is Rick's fault, even though neither of them will ever quite say that directly. Fact 25. The show has quietly established that Beth had a deeply troubled childhood that hints at genuine psychological damage. Rick built her a series of toys when she was young, and several of these toys were essentially weapons. A Christmas gift from Rick to a child Beth is later revealed to be a device capable of incredible destruction. There are references in the show to childhood incidents involving Beth that are never fully elaborated on, but clearly suggest that she hurt other children on at least one occasion. The show also heavily implies that Beth may have inherited some of Rick's most dangerous qualities: his capacity for coldness, his willingness to do whatever it takes, his ability to compartmentalize moral concerns. These qualities are kept in check by Beth's need to present as a functional, normal suburban mother. But they are there, running underneath. Fact 26. Jerry Smith is more capable than anyone in the show gives him credit for, and the show knows this even when it is laughing at him. In one episode, Jerry survives alone on an alien planet without any assistance, which is more than many characters with far greater resources could accomplish. In several moments across the series, Jerry's very particular kind of social intelligence, his ability to find common ground with whoever he is talking to, genuinely saves the day. His weakness is not his intelligence, but his insecurity, which prevents him from ever pressing advantages at moments when he has them. Jerry's moments of actual competence are consistently overshadowed or followed by a self-sabotaging retreat. The tragedy of Jerry is not that he is incapable, it is that he believes he is and acts accordingly. Fact 27. The crack in the Smith family's driveway, which appears at the end of Season 1 when the house and part of the yard are briefly transported to another dimension and then returned, is never fully repaired throughout the rest of the series. This is a small, background-level piece of continuity that the production team maintained with care across multiple seasons. In Season 2, Jerry is seen weed-whacking around it, which is exactly the kind of passive, ineffective response to a problem that defines Jerry's character. In the same season, a hole blasted into the garage roof by an accident remains lazily patched with boards for subsequent episodes. The show's willingness to maintain physical consequences in its settings is part of what makes its universe feel lived in and real rather than episodically reset. Fact 28. King Jellybean, the villain of the episode Me Seeks and Destroy, is not an original character. Justin Roiland created an earlier version of this character for a Channel 101 short called Unbelievable Tales, where he was called Crumply Crumplestian. In that earlier incarnation, Crumply Crumplestian was, if anything, even more deeply wrong than King Jellybean, and was involved in acts of violence against children. King Jellybean in Rick and Morty is already one of the darkest elements the show ever introduced. A seemingly gentle, lovable figure who turns out to be a predator, the threat of which is directed at Morty himself. The fact that Roiland had been developing this particular kind of horror, the monster disguised as soft whimsy, goes back well before Rick and Morty. Fact 29. Morty has fathered 2 children in the course of the show, both through unusual circumstances and both in separate episodes. The first is Morty Jr., the half-alien offspring, born after Morty accidentally impregnates a Gazorpian sex robot in Raising Gazorpazorp. The second is a horse-human hybrid child born after events in Rick-dependent Spray that the show handles with characteristic commitment to taking absurd premises completely seriously. Neither of these children appears regularly in the show or is treated as a major ongoing narrative element, which is itself a kind of running gag. Morty is 14 years old with multiple offspring across different species, and the show moves past this information with almost no ceremony. Fact 30. In the Season 2 episode Morty Night Run, the show introduces the daycare facility where Rick drops Jerry while he and Morty go on an adventure. The entire concept is built around the multiverse mechanic. Because there are infinite Ricks and infinite Morty-adjacent families, there are also infinite Jerrys, and the daycare exists specifically to hold them all while their respective Ricks do things. The facility contains Jerrys from countless different dimensions, each experiencing his own variations of familiar insecurities and small humiliations. The art team was tasked with designing 8 entirely different alien worlds visible through the windows of this facility, each representing a different dimension that a different Jerry had come from. The detail work involved in that background design, most of which viewers would never consciously register, is a good example of the level of craft the show brought to its world building. The Jerrys themselves interact with each other in the facility and display a remarkable cross-dimensional solidarity, finding in each other the understanding they have never quite received at home. There is a whole film to be made about the Jerry daycare, and the show knows it, which is why it only gives you a glimpse before pulling you back to the main story. There is also something philosophically interesting about the Jerry daycare as a concept. Every Jerry exists in relationship to a Rick. Without that Rick, a Jerry is defined only by his Jerryness, his specific combination of mediocrity, warmth, insecurity, and endurance. At the daycare, surrounded only by other Jerrys, that Jerryness becomes something different. It becomes a kind of species, a way of being. The Jerrys find each other funny and recognizable in ways they cannot with anyone else, because nobody else has quite the same experience of being exactly this specific kind of person in exactly this specific kind of household. The daycare is played mostly for comedy, but under the comedy, it is one of the most empathetic things the show ever does for its most consistently mocked character. Section 4. Hidden references in every episode fact. 31. Every episode title in Rick and Morty contains a pun, wordplay, or cultural reference, and the consistency of this pattern across every season is remarkable. The naming convention runs from obvious to subtle. Anatomy Park is an immediate parody of Jurassic Park, using a human body as the setting rather than an island. Lawnmower Dog echoes the Lawnmower Man. Total Recall riffs on Total Recall. Morty Night Run takes Overnight Run and slides in the character's name. But deeper into the series, the wordplay becomes more layered. Edge of Tomorty, Rick Die Rick Pete, compresses Edge of Tomorrow and a Rick naming convention into 5 words. Never Ricking Morty is a subtle twist on Never-Ending Story. The episode titles are their own small puzzle, a reward for anyone paying attention. Fact 32. The pilot episode of Rick and Morty, the very first one, contains one of the most densely packed homages to science fiction cinema ever assembled in a single animation frame. At the interdimensional customs scene, the background contains silhouettes of aliens from dozens of beloved science fiction franchises. A prawn from District 9, the alien from Ridley Scott's Alien franchise, a Moonanite from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. The scene functions like a Where's Waldo puzzle for science fiction fans, and the detail work that went into populating that background with recognizable silhouettes speaks to how self-aware the show was about its own place in a long tradition of science fiction. Storytelling right from the very first episode. Fact 33. The episode Something Ricked This Way Comes has a shop at its center called Needful Things. This is a direct and unmistakable reference to the Stephen King novel of the same name, in which a mysterious stranger opens a shop in a small town and sells people the things they most want, always at a terrible cost. The show's version follows the same logic. The devil opens a shop, sells cursed items, and the items deliver what they promise while destroying the people who receive them. Rick's intervention turns this into a science and logic versus supernaturalism debate, with Rick systematically disenchanting the cursed items and ruining the devil's business. The King reference is in plain sight on the sign outside the shop. Fact 34. Autoerotic Assimilation, the episode where Rick reconnects with Unity, contains a brilliant and very pointed tribute to Dan Harmon's previous show, Community. At one point during the episode, Rick asks Unity to create a television show for him. The show that Unity creates, which Rick watches and then immediately begins to criticize and demand changes to, recreates a sequence of events and characters that mirrors the exact cast and storylines of Community. Rick then has the show canceled, then recommissioned, then canceled again. For anyone familiar with the chaotic production history of Community, including Harmon's own firing from the show and his eventual return, this sequence reads as a deeply personal piece of self-commentary, written with the bleak affection of someone who has been through something genuinely painful. Fact 35. There is an ongoing, loving relationship between Rick and Morty and Gravity Falls, the beloved Disney XD animated series created by Alex Hirsch, who is Justin Roiland's close friend in real life. The two creators planned several intentional crossover Easter eggs. In the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, items belonging to Grunkle Stan, the lovable con artist uncle from Gravity Falls, can be seen falling out of portals in the background. In another episode, Morty is seen carrying Journal 3, the mysterious coded journal that is central to the mythology of Gravity Falls. In the Citadel episodes, two background Mortys can be spotted wearing clothing and hairstyles that mirror Dipper and Mabel Pines, the twin protagonists of Gravity Falls. The relationship between the two shows is a genuine friendship, expressed through hidden details rather than an official corporate crossover. Fact 36. The character of Mr. Meeseeks was actually partly drawn from a real impulse Justin Roiland had experienced. In the episode Meeseeks and Destroy, Jerry asks the Meeseeks he summons to help him take 2 strokes off his golf game. This leads to the episode's central catastrophe, where Meeseeks who have been alive too long begin to deteriorate and eventually threaten violence. Roiland has spoken about how the Nintendo game flipping scheme that Jerry participates in at one point in the show was something he actually attempted in real life, using a similar trading up strategy. The show frequently drew on personal experiences and observations from the writers' lives, giving even its most absurd premises a grounding in genuine human behavior. Fact 37. The truth tortoise that appears at the beginning of the season. 3-episode Morty's Mind Blowers delivers what sounds like incoherent mumbling to Morty when he looks into its eyes. Morty's reaction suggests that whatever it told him was so devastating that it triggers the entire episode's memory-wiping cascade. But eagle-eared listeners who reverse the audio of what the tortoise says can make out, in Justin Roiland's voice, the backwards message, "I'm a beetle. Paul is dead." This is a reference to the legendary conspiracy theory that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was secretly replaced by a lookalike, with supposed clues hidden backwards in Beatles recordings. The truth tortoise's deepest truth, the one that shatters Morty's mind, is one of history's most famous and absurd urban legends. Fact 38. The closing card that appears at the end of each episode for Dan Harmon's production company, Harmonious Claptrap, has served as a quiet, ongoing diary of his personal life. In early seasons, the card showed Harmon sitting happily with his wife and their dogs and cat. After his divorce from comedian Aaron McGathy in 2015, the card changed. It now showed Harmon alone on a couch, surrounded by his pets, but also surrounded by vodka bottles and garbage. The warm domestic scene had become a portrait of solitude and drinking. In later seasons, after Harmon began a relationship with writer and producer Cody Heller, the card changed again, becoming warmer. The end of every episode carries, for those who watch it, a glimpse of the real life of one of the show's architects, changing quietly over the years. Fact 39. The episode Lawnmower Dog draws heavily from a failed Roiland pitch to Cartoon Network called Dog World, in which the central premise involved humans living alongside intelligent dogs. The episode's entire plot, about Rick building a helmet that increases Snuffles the dog's intelligence to superintelligence and the subsequent dog uprising, is built on the bones of that unproduced concept. When Snuffles, renamed Snowball by Rick, eventually transports all of Earth's dogs to a new world, it is a direct lift from what would have been a central premise of Dog World. This habit of recycling unrealized projects into Easter eggs and episode premises gave Rick and Morty a quality of being made by people who had genuinely accumulated years of creative material they had never been able to use, and who finally had a context where all of it could find a home. Fact 40. A beautiful piece of foreshadowing in Season 1 plants the seeds for a storyline that would not pay off until years later. In the episode Morty Night Run, Rick shoots and kills an entity called Fart, a gaseous being who had been communicating with Morty through music. Just before they leave the scene, Rick casually scoops up some of the alien rocks that had been surrounding Fart and tosses them into his spaceship. This happens quickly, in the background, with no comment. In the very next episode, Total Rick-All, those same alien rocks are visible being thrown into the trash by Rick, and notably, they are missing the pink spots they had in the previous episode. This tiny, barely visible continuity detail suggests that those rocks were connected to the parasite problem that drives Total Rick-All, and that Rick may have inadvertently brought the contamination home with him, though this has never been officially confirmed. The detail rewards people who are paying close attention to backgrounds. Fact 41. In the episode Get Swifty, 3 people are sacrificed to the giant heads, and one of them, the one labeled Thief, is drawn to closely resemble Justin Roiland. This is one of several times that the creators drew caricatures of themselves or their friends into the background of the show. The practice of hiding creator likenesses in the artwork is a tradition in animation going back decades, and Rick and Morty participates in it with a frequency and creativity that makes spotting these camouflages a genuine pursuit for attentive fans. Fact 42. The episode The Ricklantis Mix-Up, which many fans and critics consider one of the finest episodes in the entire series, is titled as if it will be about Rick and Morty visiting the lost city of Atlantis. The title is a misdirect. The episode is actually an anthology episode set entirely within the Citadel of Ricks, following multiple storylines about different Ricks and Mortys living within that society. Rick and Morty's actual Atlantis adventure happens entirely off-screen during this episode. The audience receives a brief post-credits update that it was amazing, and then never hears about it again. The show's decision to show us the Citadel story rather than the Atlantis story is itself a statement about where the show's real interests lie. What makes the episode even more impressive is how many completely separate storylines it maintains simultaneously without any feeling of fragmentation or imbalance. There is the storyline of a factory Rick who keeps getting exploited by the system. There is the storyline of a Morty running for president of the Citadel who is not what he appears. There is the storyline of a police Rick and his Morty partner investigating crimes. There is the storyline of a Rick working alone in a waffle factory whose tears of genuine contentment are being harvested. Each of these threads carries its own emotional logic, its own arc, its own payoff. And the entire episode was animated with all of Rick's and Morty's voices being performed by Justin Roiland, who in that single episode gave distinct vocal performances to dozens of different variants of the two characters. It is, from a pure voice acting standpoint, one of the most demanding single-episode performances in the history of animated television. Section 5. The Science Behind the Show. Fact 43. The multiverse concept at the heart of Rick and Morty is grounded in genuine scientific theory, specifically the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which was proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. According to this interpretation, every quantum event that can have multiple outcomes does have multiple outcomes, and each possible outcome branches into its own separate universe. The implication is that there are an infinite number of parallel universes containing every possible version of every situation that has ever occurred. This is not science fiction. It is a legitimate theoretical framework within quantum physics that a significant portion of physicists take seriously, though there is considerable debate about its validity. Rick and Morty does not get everything about this right, but the basic premise, the infinite branching universes full of different versions of every person who has ever lived, has real scientific roots. The show's multiverse functions somewhat differently from the physics version. In quantum many-worlds, the branches diverge from quantum events at the subatomic scale, producing universes that are almost identical to ours in their large-scale structure. Rick and Morty's multiverse contains universes where chairs sit on people, where corn replaces human hands, and where the laws of physics appear to operate entirely differently. But the show engages with the emotional and philosophical implications of infinite parallel existence with surprising seriousness. If you exist in infinite versions across infinite universes, does any individual version of you matter? Rick's answer, delivered across the series in various ways, is consistently bleak. Probably not. Morty's answer, delivered in moments of genuine bravery and genuine connection, is consistently more complicated and more hopeful. The philosophical debate between them is the same debate physicists and philosophers are actually having about the many worlds interpretation, just expressed through alien encounters and body horror. Brian Greene, a professor of physics and mathematics at Columbia University, has produced a model of 9 different types of multiverse. Max Tegmark, a physics professor at MIT, has proposed up to 4 types. Adult Swim has called Rick and Morty its most scientifically accurate animated comedy, which is an extremely loose claim, but the show does engage with these ideas more substantively than most entertainment media. Several physicists have publicly commented that while the show does not depict the multiverse accurately, it does something arguably more valuable. It makes an esoteric scientific debate part of the cultural conversation. People who had never heard of the many worlds interpretation now have a visual and emotional vocabulary for thinking about it. That is not nothing. Fact 44. The portal gun, Rick's most iconic invention, has been analyzed by real astrophysicists who have attempted to explain what physical mechanism could theoretically make it function. Kevork Abazazian, a professor of physics and astronomy at the University of California, Irvine, has described the portal gun's green fluid as likely containing the energy needed to create a wormhole and the exotic matter required to stabilize it. The concept of exotic matter, a hypothetical substance with negative energy density that could theoretically hold a wormhole open, is a real concept within theoretical physics. It has never been observed or created, but it is not ruled out by the laws of physics as we currently understand them. Rick's portal gun essentially takes 2 of the most speculative but scientifically grounded concepts in physics and combines them into something that looks, on screen, like a casual Tuesday. Fact 45. The Season 1 episode Rick Potion No. 9 is one of the show's most accurate depictions of scientific ethics and unintended consequences. Rick's love potion, which is based on a combination of chemicals and flu virus vectors, is designed to make Jessica love Morty unconditionally. When it spreads through the school and then, thanks to the flu season's airborne transmission through the entire human population, Rick attempts to fix it by using a praying mantis DNA compound. This creates the Cronenberg's human-mantis hybrids that are deeply wrong in ways that take careful observation to fully appreciate. The episode's logic tracks: an airborne vector for a behavioral change compound, a misapplied correction that makes things categorically worse. The premise is absurd, but its internal logic follows from real principles about how viruses spread and how gene therapy can produce catastrophically unexpected outcomes. Fact 46. The episode A Wrinkle in Time from Season 2 uses quantum mechanics as its central structural device. Time fractures into multiple overlapping possibilities after Rick freezes time for too long during a party cleanup, and the episode visualizes those overlapping timelines in a way that is visually unprecedented in animated television. The split-screen sequences, where multiple possible versions of events play out simultaneously and then collapse back into a single timeline, are a visual metaphor for quantum superposition, the idea that particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until an observation forces them to collapse into a single definite state. Rick's line explaining that there are no timelines, only uncertainty, and the reveal of the house floating in a space full of cats is a direct and explicit reference to Schrödinger's famous thought experiment. Fact 47. Dark matter is the fuel for Rick's spaceship, and this is not entirely fictional. Dark matter is estimated by current scientific understanding to comprise approximately 85% of the universe's total mass. It cannot be seen directly. It makes its presence known only through its gravitational effects on visible matter. Real physicists have proposed that dark matter particles, sometimes called neutralinos, could potentially be harvested for energy in the distant future. Physicist Jia Liu at New York University has specifically suggested the possibility of spacecraft with intakes designed to consume dark matter particles as a form of propulsion. Rick's choice of dark matter fuel is not a random science fiction concept. It is an extrapolation of real current physics. Fact 48. The brain-controlling parasite in the Season 2 episode Total Recall has a genuine, if less extreme, real-world analog. The show presents parasites that can invade the brain and manipulate behavior and memory. Rabies, a real virus that infects approximately 59,000 people annually worldwide, does something genuinely analogous. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and takes control of portions of the brain, including the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. The behavioral changes rabies causes, the aggression, the confusion, the altered social behavior, are the result of the virus essentially reprogramming the brain's control centers to serve the virus's reproductive needs. Real biological mind control exists. It is just not as visually spectacular as what the Smiths are dealing with in their house. Fact 49. Rick's ability to shrink Morty and inject him into a human body in the episode Anatomy Park, which creates a kind of Jurassic Park inside a homeless man named Ruben, is grounded in the real and much older concept of nanomedicine. Researchers have long theorized about the possibility of nanoscale devices or even miniaturized vehicles that could travel through the human bloodstream and interact with biological systems from the inside. The episode's diseases behaving like attractions in a theme park is comedy, but the underlying concept of miniaturization for medical purposes is not. Fact 50. Morty's brainwaves are a specific and repeatedly referenced plot device in the show. They cancel out Rick's brainwaves, making Rick's presence undetectable by galactic authorities who monitor for the distinctive neural signature of geniuses. This is the in-universe explanation for why Rick needs Morty specifically rather than any other companion. The concept, while fictional, draws on real neuroscience. Brainwaves, which are the oscillating electrical patterns produced by neural activity, are measurable with real technology. The idea that two different brainwave patterns could be mathematically complementary, effectively canceling each other out the way noise-canceling headphones use opposing waveforms to eliminate sound, is a direct application of real physics to fictional neuroscience. The show dressed the logic in science fiction clothes, but the underlying structure makes logical sense. Fact 51. The central finite curve, one of the show's most conceptually ambitious pieces of lore, is essentially a built wall around a specific subset of the multiverse. Rick and the other Ricks designed it to lock out any universe in which Rick is not the most dominant life form. The concept has real philosophical parallels in the idea of epistemic bubbles or filter bubbles, the human tendency to create information environments that confirm what we already believe and exclude challenges to our worldview. The central finite curve is literally a cosmic-scale filter bubble. Rick built a wall around all of infinite reality to make sure his reality could never include a version of itself where he was not on top. The scientific concept is fictional. The psychological behavior it represents is thoroughly and recognizably human. Fact 52. Rick's freeze ray, while clearly science fiction, has a real and currently active scientific counterpart. Cryonics, the practice of preserving a human body at extremely low temperatures after clinical death in the hope of future revival, is a legitimate, if deeply speculative, area of research. The Cryonics Institute and similar organizations have preserved hundreds of human bodies at liquid nitrogen temperatures. The scientific controversy around it is genuine and ongoing, with significant debate about whether the structural damage caused by freezing can ever be reversed. Rick's ability to freeze and unfreeze living beings with no permanent damage is well beyond current technology, but the underlying impulse, preservation at extreme cold for later revival, is something that real scientists are actively pursuing. Fact 53. The virtual reality sequences that appear across multiple Rick and Morty episodes reflect genuine and rapidly evolving real-world technology. At the time the show began airing in 2013, consumer virtual reality was still largely theoretical. By the time later seasons were being produced, VR headsets were commercial products available to the general public. The show's treatment of virtual reality, particularly its exploration of what happens when the line between virtual and real becomes unrecognizable, has aged into prescience. Episodes dealing with simulated realities and false memories are now asking questions that feel significantly more urgent than they did a decade ago. Fact 54. The episode Morty's Mind Blowers reveals that Rick has been selectively erasing Morty's memories throughout their adventures whenever those memories become too traumatic or too inconvenient. The existence of an entire room full of these erased memories, color-coded and organized by Rick with what appears to be genuine care, says something quietly devastating about their relationship. Rick has been deciding for Morty what Morty gets to remember about his own life. This is not science fiction as a thought experiment. It is an extraordinarily faithful portrait of what abusive caretaking can look like. The person in power curating the memory of the person in their care, removing the evidence of harm to protect the relationship and the power dynamic that makes it function. The episode also contains a fascinating structural detail. The memories that Rick has been erasing are not all memories of things Rick did to Morty. Some of them are memories of things Morty did wrong, mistakes Morty himself made that he was unable to live with. Rick has been erasing Morty's shame as well as his trauma. This complicates the reading considerably. Is Rick performing a genuine act of care, protecting his grandson from unbearable psychological weight? Or is he maintaining control by being the keeper of all the things Morty cannot know about himself? The episode does not resolve this question. It presents both possibilities simultaneously and leaves the audience to decide how they feel about a man who has built an entire archive of the things his loved one cannot handle remembering. One small, almost secret detail in the Mind Blower sequence. One of the memories Rick shows involves Morty accidentally causing the suicide of a man who Morty believed was from the moon. The man's license plate reads SATFIV3, a reference to NASA's Saturn V rocket, which was the launch vehicle used in the Apollo moon missions that first carried humans to the lunar surface. The mnemonic device for this fact, the connection between the license plate and the actual history of moon-related technology, adds a layer of genuine tragedy to a comedic throwaway scene. Morty's misunderstanding of where the man was from was not random. There were clues. He just missed them. Section 6. Easter eggs you probably missed. Fact 55. The production team for Rick and Morty maintains what is, by the standards of animated television, an unusual degree of physical continuity in the world of the show. The crack in the driveway mentioned earlier is just one example. Summer's accidental hole in the garage roof, created in a Season 2 episode, remains clumsily boarded over in subsequent episodes rather than disappearing between scenes. Rick's various experiments that go wrong leave visible evidence in the house and garage that persists. The show is not a continuous, serialized drama, but its commitment to letting consequences accumulate physically in the environment gives the world weight. When Rick causes damage, the world remembers. This physical continuity serves a narrative function that goes beyond simple realism. It creates a lived-in quality, a sense that the Smith household exists between episodes as well as during them. The crack is there when no one is looking. The boarded garage hole is there on quiet Sunday afternoons, when nothing interdimensional is happening. The world of the show has thickness. It has off-screen life. This is why it feels like a real place, despite the impossible things that happen there. The real is constructed through accumulated small details, and the Rick and Morty production team understands this with unusual precision for a show that spends so much of its runtime in explicitly unreal settings. The physical continuity also functions as a kind of quiet accounting. The damage accumulates. The record stays. Every patched roof and cracked driveway is a receipt for something that happened, a reminder that the consequences of chaos do not disappear when the camera looks away. In a show so deeply interested in consequences and the impossibility of undoing actions, this environmental memory is the visual grammar of the theme. The world looks the way it does because of what was done to it. Just like the characters. Fact 56. The episode that is often identified as the greatest in the series, the Ricklantis Mix-Up, contains a Doctor Who Rick in the crowd scenes at the Citadel. He is wearing a long scarf that is immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with Tom Baker's iconic portrayal of the Fourth Doctor. The Doctor Who reference is blink and you miss it, occupying the background for a fraction of a second. But it speaks to the density of cultural references the animation team was embedding at every level of the show's visual space. Fact 57. At the beginning of the Ricklantis Mix-Up, when Rick and Morty are establishing that they are going on an Atlantis adventure, which we will never see, Morty mentions having heard that Atlantis has beautiful architecture. The callback to this unseen adventure, delivered as a brief and glowing endorsement in the episode's post-credits scene, is one of the show's most elegant structural jokes. The adventure the episode is not about is described as one of the best things Rick and Morty have ever done. The adventure the episode is about, the sprawling, complex political anthology of the Citadel, is presented as the lesser option that they grudgingly settled for. This inversion, framing the genuinely brilliant thing we are watching as the consolation prize, is the kind of layered, self-aware humor that the show manages uniquely well. Fact 58. Clone Beth, who appears after Rick gives Beth the option of having a clone of herself stay home while the real Beth explores the universe, has a blue streak in her hair that is a direct reference to Community. On Community, the character Britta has a distinct blue streak in her hair, particularly in what the show calls evil Britta moments, where her most self-destructive qualities are amplified. Clone Beth's blue streak is a quiet signal to Community fans about the nature of the clone, the version of Beth that stays behind, performing the domestic life while the real Beth goes free, carries a visual marker connecting her to a character defined by self-sabotage and compromised identity. Whether Beth clone is the real Beth or the copy remains intentionally ambiguous throughout. Fact 59. The Morty and Rick episodes set at the Citadel contain a reference to Dipper and Mabel Pines from Gravity Falls that is more elaborate than a simple background cameo. Two Mortys who are dressed and styled to resemble Dipper and Mabel are seen accompanied by their Rick, creating a visual scenario that implies a Gravity Falls equivalent of the Rick and Morty dynamic. The same anxious young companions, the same eccentric genius guardian, just from a different show. The crossover is purely visual, never acknowledged in dialogue, and functions as a genuine shared universe Easter egg rather than a simple graphic pun. Fact 60. The Szechuan Sauce episode, the Season 3 premiere, The Rickshank Rickdemption, is built around Rick's fixation on a real sauce. McDonald's created a Szechuan dipping sauce in 1998 to promote the Disney film Mulan. It was available briefly, then discontinued, then forgotten about by everyone except, apparently, Rick Sanchez. When the episode aired in April 2017, the show's reference to the sauce set off a genuine cultural moment. In October 2017, McDonald's staged a one-day promotion, bringing back a limited number of Szechuan sauce packets to select locations. The promotion was catastrophically underprepared. Quantities were reportedly as low as 20 packets per store. Hundreds of fans lined up, many having camped overnight. When stores ran out within minutes, the crowds turned angry, chanting broke out. Police were called to multiple locations in multiple cities. The McDonald's corporate chef, who had helped engineer the promotion, received thousands of hate messages and death threats within 10 minutes of the sauce running out. He has described this publicly as the greatest batch of hate mail he has ever received in his professional life. The sauce returned properly in February 2018 and again in March 2022. The incident is a genuinely unprecedented example of an animated television show creating real-world civic disorder. The episode itself contains an interesting structural deception at its heart. Rick's obsession with the Szechuan sauce is presented as his singular driving goal, the thing he was working toward the whole time, the thing that makes the escape from the Galactic Federation feel triumphant. And then the episode reveals the obsession for what it is. Not a genuine desire, but a false bottom. A way of hiding from a real desire underneath it. Rick does not actually want the sauce. He wants to obscure the fact that he escaped imprisonment to be with his family. The sauce is the lie he tells himself about why he came back. The comedy is in the absurdity of the lie. The truth is much more quietly moving. Even the catchphrase moment at the end of the Season 3 premiere, where Rick insists that everything he did was in the name of Szechuan sauce and it had better be canon, is Rick performing his own indifference to cover a genuine feeling. The show is doing in the episode what Rick does in his life, presenting the joke face forward to protect the real thing underneath. Fact 61. The Me Seeks box that Rick introduces in the Season 1 episode Me Seeks and Destroy has a button on it. This is all that is needed. Press the button, a Me Seeks appears, give it a task, it completes the task, and then ceases to exist. The creatures are designed to want this outcome. They do not want to exist. They experience consciousness as an unpleasant interruption between their emergence and their dissolution. Their desperate urgency to complete tasks comes from the fact that every additional second of existence is experienced as suffering. The creation of a being whose only meaningful state is non-existence and whose purpose is purely instrumental to the needs of whoever summons it sits alongside the show's other deeply uncomfortable ideas about consciousness, purpose, and the ethics of bringing things into being. Fact 62. Rick's lab coat, which he wears in almost every episode, has two specific pockets that serve specific purposes visible to sharp observers. His portal gun is always in one pocket. His flask is always in the other. The position of these two objects, one representing his power and freedom, the other representing his addiction and emotional avoidance, mirrors the two sides of Rick's character. His science is in one hand. His poison is in the other. He reaches for both of them with equal, reflexive certainty. Fact 63. The show's production team designed every alien world that appears across the series with a principle that the art director James McDermott described as world texturization. Every element of an alien world, not just the beings who inhabit it, but the cars, the wallpaper, the weapons, the furniture, should reflect the defining characteristic of that world. In the episode where Snowball creates a dog world, everything in that world is either covered in fur, has floppy ears, or has a tail. The cars have tails. The buildings have ears. Every designed element of the world expresses the same underlying biological logic. This level of environmental consistency across alien worlds takes enormous effort and goes mostly unnoticed by casual viewers, but it is part of what gives the show's universe a feeling of genuine internal logic rather than random decoration. Fact 64. 64. In the episode Get Swifty, Rick and Morty are forced to compose and perform a piece of music to satisfy a race of giant heads that have arrived in Earth's orbit and are demanding entertainment. The show that these giant heads are apparently running, in which Earth is a contestant, is described as a vast intergalactic performance competition, and Earth is not the only contestant. The giant heads and their competition are never fully explained, but the implication is that they have been running this competition across the universe for an enormous span of time, abducting civilizations and destroying those that fail to perform. The show treats this apocalyptic scenario, which includes mass panic, a new religion forming around the giant heads, and the planet's near destruction, with characteristic casual humor while never quite losing sight of how genuinely terrible the situation is. Fact 65. The episode Pickle Rick won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018, which made it one of the most decorated episodes in the show's history. The premise, Rick turning himself into a pickle to avoid family therapy, is one of the show's most famous. But the episode's real substance is in the therapy scene with Dr. Wong, played brilliantly by Susan Sarandon, where Rick's coping mechanisms are named and dissected with an uncomfortable precision. Dr. Wong's observation that Rick uses his genius to justify avoiding the simple, difficult work of being a functioning human being, and that this avoidance is not wisdom, but a kind of sophisticated cowardice, is one of the most direct pieces of psychological analysis the show ever delivers about its protagonist. The pickle transformation is the hook. The therapy room is where the episode actually lives. What makes the therapy scene particularly striking is its formal structure. Dr. Wong does not argue with Rick. She does not try to win the debate he is clearly hoping to have. She simply names what she sees, with the calm precision of someone who has observed this exact mechanism in countless intelligent, self-defeating people before, and has no interest in being impressed by any of them. Rick responds with a long, articulate monologue about his own nihilism that is genuinely brilliant and entirely beside the point. Dr. Wong acknowledges that it is brilliant and continues to hold her ground. This is the scene's central dynamic: Rick deploying intelligence as a deflection, and Dr. Wong simply not accepting the deflection without making a big deal about it. It is the most accurate depiction of good therapy in a primetime animated show that anyone has ever produced. And it is absolutely secondary to a storyline about a pickle man fighting rats in a Russian government facility. The episode also contains the series' most efficient summary of Beth's psychology. When Dr. Wong addresses Beth directly and describes the cost of raising children in the gravitational field of someone with Rick's patterns, Beth's response, the subtle crumbling of her carefully maintained composure, is one of Sarah Chalke's finest moments in the role. Beth came to family therapy because she had to bring her kids. She was not expecting to be seen. The episode is titled After a Pickle. Its emotional center is a woman realizing that someone is looking at her clearly, possibly for the first time. Fact 66. The show has a small but meaningful tradition of putting real-world celebrities into its universe in unexpected ways. Ice-T, played by himself, appears in Season 3's Rickmancing the Stone as a literal piece of water shaped like ice with a rapper's persona. The show's treatment of him, where he gradually discovers his own alien heritage as a being of pure energy from the ice realm, is both a joke about celebrity and a genuinely committed piece of storytelling. Ice-T later tweeted about the episode, engaging with the show's mythology with apparent genuine enthusiasm. It is one of those moments where the line between commentary and participation blurs in a way that is entirely characteristic of Rick and Morty's relationship with pop culture. The show also made a practice of embedding its own creators as background characters when the opportunity arose. In the episode Get Swifty, the sacrifice labeled Thief is drawn to resemble Justin Roiland, placing the creator inside his own creation's sacrificial ritual with a commitment to dark self-deprecation that feels very authentic to the show's sensibility. The show's post-credits scenes also frequently feature background cameos and visual jokes that reward viewers who stay past the formal end of each episode. Rick and Morty has been rewarding fans for watching through the credits since episode 1, planting scenes, jokes, and continuity details in the post-credit space that the main episode does not explain and does not need to. There is something deeply generous about the show's relationship with its audience. It consistently gives more than is required, hides things that most people will never notice, and maintains a private conversation with the most attentive viewers that runs parallel to the experience of more casual watching. The show can be enjoyed without knowing any of its secrets. It can also be lived with, returned to repeatedly, and rewarded with fresh discoveries across years of rewatching. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and making both simultaneously possible is genuinely difficult creative work. Section 7. The Multiverse, the Citadel, and the Deeper Lore. Fact 67. The central finite curve is perhaps the most disturbing piece of lore the show has ever introduced, and it reframes everything that came before it. When Evil Morty reveals its existence in the Season 5 finale, he explains it in terms that are simple and devastating. The Ricks built a wall around infinity. They separated out all the infinite universes where Rick is the smartest person alive and isolated those universes from the rest of the multiverse. Every Rick that exists within the curve lives in a reality that was engineered to ensure he is always on top. Every adventure Rick has ever had, every planet he has visited, every civilization he has encountered, all of them exist within a pre-filtered version of reality designed to make Rick feel special. The portal gun, the instrument of infinite freedom, only travels within the wall. Rick's freedom was always a managed illusion. Fact 68. Rick C137, our Rick, helped build the central finite curve. This is established in the lore and has massive implications for how we understand the character. The curve was originally designed partly as a means of trapping or containing Rick Prime, the version of Rick who murdered C137's wife Diane and his original daughter Beth. Rick built a cosmic-scale trap, and then, when it failed to contain its original target, let it persist as a monument to his grief and his control. The other Ricks adopted and expanded it for their own reasons, but its original architect is the man we have been following all along. Fact 69. Evil Morty has been present in the show since Season 1, Episode 10, which aired in 2014. His reveal at the end of that episode, where a seemingly ordinary Morty removes his eye patch, and the audience understands that he has been controlling an evil Rick via a brain-implanted device, is retroactively one of the most carefully constructed reveals in the series. The episode is titled Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, a pun on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it introduces the Citadel, the Council of Ricks, and the concept of multiversal Rick and Morty dynamics all in one episode. Evil Morty appears in it, is revealed, and then vanishes into a crowd of rescued Mortys without anyone realizing what just happened. He was there from almost the very beginning. Fact 70. Evil Morty's actual origin, revealed in the Season 7 episode Unmortrican, is both simpler and more resonant than the elaborate theories fans had constructed around it for years. He was just a Morty who had been treated badly enough for long enough that he decided to act. He got his Rick blackout drunk, implanted a control device in his brain, and began his plan. There was no time travel, no special destiny, no elaborate secret history. He was simply a Morty who became tired of being treated as disposable and chose to do something about it. The mundanity of the origin, its rootedness in a recognizable human-scale frustration amplified to cosmic consequence, is more powerful than any contrived mythology could have been. Fact 71. Evil Morty's golden portal gun, which he uses at the end of the Season 5 finale to escape the central finite curve, is golden rather than green for a specific reason. Rick's portal guns are green because they use portal fluid that only operates within the curve. The dimensions accessible to Rick's green gun are all within the wall. Evil Morty's yellow gold gun is his own creation, engineered to breach the wall and access dimensions that Rick's gun cannot reach. The color difference, subtle and easy to miss in the excitement of the finale, is a visual confirmation of everything Evil Morty has been building toward. His gold portal gun goes where no Rick has ever gone because no Rick has ever been motivated to build it. Fact 72. The Citadel of Rick serves as the show's most sustained and ambitious piece of societal commentary. The episodes set there are structured as a full examination of how a society of Ricks functions, which turns out to be very much like how ordinary human societies function, with all the same tendencies toward stratification, exploitation, and institutional corruption. Rich Ricks occupy positions of comfort and power. Poor Ricks labor in factories and are exploited by the systems that the richer Ricks have designed. Mortis exist at the bottom as a permanent underclass, their role defined entirely by their relationship to Ricks. The Citadel is a capitalist society with all the aesthetics and language of meritocracy and a reality of inherited privilege and systemic suppression. The show does not belabor this point or make it preachy. It simply builds the Citadel in detail and trusts the audience to recognize what they are looking at. Fact 73. Simple Rick, the variant of Rick who appears in the Citadel episode, is arguably the most emotionally significant character the show ever introduces in a short amount of screen time. Simple Rick is a Rick from Dimension C-60, described as being 60 iterations off the central finite curve. He is a Rick who found genuine contentment watching his daughter Beth grow up, and whose tears of authentic happiness in that moment were so rare and precious that the Citadel captured him and now uses his tear production as a flavoring for a cookie called Simple Ricks. He is kept in a chair, living the same memory on loop, crying with joy while his tears are harvested for corporate profit. It is one of the most efficiently devastating images the show has ever created. Fact 74. 74. Rick Prime, who serves as the primary antagonist of Season 6 and the final antagonist of Rick's origin story, is characterized by the show as a Rick who simply has no emotional investment in family whatsoever. Every other Rick, however nihilistic and self-protective, has some residual connection to the family structure. Some pull toward the Morty or Beth in his life. Rick Prime does not. He killed Rick C-137's wife and daughter, not out of ideology or cruelty, but because Rick refused to join the early Citadel, and Rick Prime responded to that refusal with the same casual indifference he would apply to any minor inconvenience. He then spent decades hiding from the dimension-hopping, revenge-driven Rick C-137, not out of fear but because being hunted was a bore. Rick Prime as a character is an answer to the question, what does Rick look like without even the smallest trace of love? Fact 75. The show's depiction of the Council of Ricks, the governing body of the Citadel before evil Morty dismantles it, includes an elaborate internal corruption storyline that mirrors real-world oligarchic systems with uncomfortable precision. The Council claims to represent all Ricks while actually serving the interests of the most powerful ones. It uses the Mortys as a resource while publicly maintaining that they are partners. When evil Morty is elected president and begins dismantling the Council's shadow operations, the Council's response is to attempt to maintain the existing structure through force, revealing that the democratic veneer over the Citadel was never the actual source of its power. The parallels are not subtle, but they are delivered with enough wit and visual invention that they feel organic rather than didactic. The Citadel episodes also contain one of the show's most quietly sad subplots, the story of worker Rick. A Rick who has been ground down by the Citadel's economic system to the point where he has almost nothing of the genius or the defiance that defines most versions of the character. He works in a factory, he follows the rules, he does not use the portal gun or travel to other dimensions or build impossible things. He just shows up and does what the job requires. The Citadel has taken a version of the universe's most brilliant mind and given it a factory job, and that mind accepted the job because it needed to eat. Worker Rick is one of the most devastating what-ifs in the entire show, the answer to the question of what Rick looks like when circumstances have removed every resource his intelligence needed to manifest. The answer is, he looks like everyone else. He just does it with a little more quiet bitterness around the eyes. Fact 76. The episode A Wrinkle in Time uses a visual technique during its quantum timeline sequences that was entirely original in animation when it aired. Multiple overlapping versions of the same scene are shown simultaneously within split-screen frames that themselves split and multiply as the probability waves increase. The team used Adobe After Effects to create composites of the same animation played simultaneously with minor variations, creating the visual language of quantum superposition directly from the show's existing production tools. The result looks expensive and technically demanding in ways that it was not actually producing. It is an example of the show's visual inventiveness finding solutions that read as revolutionary without being particularly resource-intensive. The episode also contains a moment where Rick's selflessness becomes visible for a fraction of a second in a way that the show immediately tries to take back. When a timeline split threatens both Rick and Morty with permanent dissolution, Rick makes a choice that saves Morty at the cost of himself, and then the show immediately walks this back by having it be resolved in a different way. But the choice was made. Rick chose. In a millisecond that the show wants you to see but does not want to make a big deal about, Rick revealed what he would do if he had to choose. The episode's quantum complexity is partly there to give the show permission to show you this and then immediately bury it in probability waves before anyone has to acknowledge what they just saw. Fact 77. The show's relationship with its own continuity is more carefully maintained than it appears. The stated creative goal from Roiland and Harmon was a show without traditional continuity, each episode functioning as its own entry point. But in practice, the show has maintained an increasingly rich and detailed continuous history, particularly around the Rick-centric mythology. The early episodes establish the texture of the relationships. The middle seasons establish the stakes. The later seasons cash in on investments made 5 or 6 years earlier. The crack in the driveway, Evil Morty's patient long game, the truth behind Rick's catchphrase, all of these are examples of a show that was far more carefully watching itself than it ever claimed to be. There is also the matter of Rick Potion number 9 being the second episode written in the writer's room, but the 5th episode aired. The production team recognized that the events of that episode, the Cronenberg catastrophe and the dimension-jumping resolution, would make more emotional sense to audiences who had spent some time with the characters first. So they held it back, aired it later, and in doing so demonstrated that the show's apparent casualness about continuity was always a managed impression rather than genuine carelessness. They cared deeply about when you found out what. They just did not want you to know how much they cared. The decision to air episodes out of their writing order and to structure the audience's relationship with continuity and surprise with that kind of deliberateness is characteristic of a writing room that treats the viewing experience as a design thing rather than an accident. Dan Harmon has spoken repeatedly about his use of the story circle as a structural tool, but the episode ordering decisions reveal something beyond structural thinking. A genuine understanding of how audiences build emotional investment and a willingness to shape that investment by controlling the sequence of revelations. Section 8. Voice acting, animation, and behind the scenes. Fact 78. Justin Roiland voiced both Rick and Morty throughout the first 6 seasons. This is remarkable not just as a feat of vocal range, but as a technical challenge in production. Roiland would record all of Morty's lines first, then record all of the scenes where Rick and Morty interact, and finally record Rick's scenes with other characters and any remaining Rick lines. This ordering was Roiland's own system for maintaining the internal logic of interactions. When he was recording Rick responding to something Morty says, he had already recorded Morty saying it and could respond to the actual performance rather than to a placeholder. It is an uncommonly actor-centered approach to voice recording that probably contributed significantly to the chemistry between the two characters. Fact 79. Roiland was known for extensive improvisation during recording sessions, and much of what fans assumed was written into the script was actually generated in the recording booth. The stammers, the mid-sentence corrections, the moments where Rick's dialogue trails off into rambling or devolves into a burp. Many of these were Roiland following an impulse rather than a text. Dan Harmon has described some sessions where Roiland would deliver a completely different version of a scene from what was written, and it would be so much better than the scripted version that they would simply use the improvised take. After Roiland's departure and the casting of Ian Cardoni as Rick and Harry Belden as Morty, from season 7 onwards, the show's production team began scripting what had previously been improvised, writing stammers, burps, and timing directly into the text with precision. The improvisational sound of the show was preserved, but it became planned rather than spontaneous. Fact 80. For certain scenes involving Rick's alcoholism and slurred speech, Dan Harmon reportedly encouraged Roiland to record while actually drinking. A behind-the-scenes featurette released by Adult Swim showed Roiland recording dialogue for a Season 3 episode with visible signs of genuine intoxication. The featurette showed associate producer Sidney Ryan dealing with Roiland's constant off-script tangents with a combination of patience and barely concealed exasperation. The approach, having the actor perform the character's intoxicated state by actually being intoxicated, is unusual in professional voice acting but produced results that were, in certain scenes, genuinely different from sober recordings in ways that contributed to Rick's believability as someone perpetually slightly blurred by alcohol. Fact 81. The writing room for Rick and Morty was, in Dan Harmon's own words, a very, very tiny room with a lot of heavy lifting from everybody. The first season's writing staff consisted of just 6 people: Roiland, Harmon, Tom Kaufman, Ryan Ridley, Wade Randolph, and Eric Acosta, with writer's assistant Mike McMahon receiving writing credit as well. Harmon has compared it to his community writing room, but smaller, more verbally rough, and with considerably more Legos and Nerf guns. The size of the room and the small number of hands passing through every script created an unusual consistency of voice across the show's early seasons. Everything felt like it came from the same sensibility because, in a very literal sense, it did. Fact 82. Mike McMahon, who began as a writer's assistant on Rick and Morty and eventually became a full writer and then showrunner, went on to create Star Trek Lower Decks, which he developed partly based on his experience in the Rick and Morty writing room. Michael Waldron, another Rick and Morty writer, went on to write for Loki, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and the Avengers Infinity War sequel films. He has described himself and colleagues as cashing in on their Rick and Morty street cred when working on major Marvel projects. The show functioned, in addition to everything else, as a talent incubator for some of the most consequential writers working in genre television and film. Fact 83. The character's visual design was influenced by multiple animation predecessors that Roiland has acknowledged openly. His cartooning style is heavily informed by The Simpsons, a fact he noted in a 2013 interview, pointing out that many of the mouth shapes and tooth designs in Rick and Morty echo Simpsons' character designs, and that this is a generational thing, a shared visual vocabulary absorbed by an entire generation of animators who grew up watching the same shows. He also cited Pendleton Ward's Adventure Time and J.G. Quintel's Regular Show as references, creating a family tree of influences that situates Rick and Morty within a specific wave of early 2010s animation that was pushing against the clean, corporate aesthetic of mainstream animation. Fact 84. H.P. Lovecraft's philosophy of cosmicism, which holds that humanity occupies an insignificant and largely irrelevant position in a vast, cold universe that is entirely indifferent to our existence, is one of the fundamental philosophical frameworks of the show. Dan Harmon has described Rick and Morty as addressing the insignificance of human existence as compared to the size of the universe, with no recognizable divine presence. This is Lovecraftian cosmicism expressed through comedy. The horror in Rick and Morty is rarely the kind of horror that can be fought or defeated. It is the horror of scale, of meaninglessness, of the universe being genuinely, completely, absolutely uninterested in whether any of these characters live or die. Rick's nihilism is Lovecraftian nihilism dressed in a lab coat and holding a flask. What the show does with this inheritance is interesting and not quite what Lovecraft himself would have expected. Lovecraft's cosmicism was largely a counsel of despair. The universe is indifferent, human meaning is constructed and fragile, and the correct response to confronting this truth is something close to horror. Rick and Morty inherits the framework, but does something different with it. The show uses Lovecraftian indifference as a heading rather than a conclusion. Yes, the universe does not care. Yes, nothing has intrinsic meaning. And also, people can still love each other. Actions can still matter to the people they affect. Grief is still real. The show holds both of these things simultaneously with unusual sophistication, acknowledging the nihilism without surrendering to it, finding the reason to keep going not in the universe's indifference, but in spite of it. Fact 85. The show's Lovecraftian influence is not only philosophical, but visual. Creatures across the series, including several background alien designs and at least one major antagonist, are clearly designed with Lovecraftian aesthetics in mind. The fourth-dimensional testicle creatures who appear in multiple episodes and claim to have beaten up Albert Einstein, inspiring him to discover special relativity, are described and depicted in terms that evoke the incomprehensible geometry and alien physicality of Lovecraft's cosmic entities. The episode where time fractured also shows fourth-dimensional beings whose design principles were drawn from Lovecraft's descriptions of things that exist outside normal spatial dimensions. The show's alien design philosophy in general tends toward creatures that are wrong in a specific way, not threatening in the manner of, say, movie monsters, but wrong in the manner of something that simply does not fit into the categories your mind uses to process reality. A creature that is not scary so much as disorienting. An alien that makes your visual processing system hesitate. This wrongness, this specific flavor of uncanny, is deeply Lovecraftian in its DNA. The show learned from one of horror fiction's great masters how to build creatures that disturb without relying on fangs or claws, how to make something alien in the truest sense of the word, and then it deployed that knowledge in the service of comedy without losing the underlying unsettledness. Fact 86. Dan Harmon has described his process of structuring episodes using what he calls a story circle, a tool he developed based on Joseph Campbell's monomyth, but modified to his own ends. The story circle is an 8-stage cycle that maps the arc of a protagonist moving from comfort into challenge and back. Harmon uses it as a kind of diagnostic tool for scripts that are not working, allowing him to identify where in the cycle a story has lost momentum or direction. The show's writing room, according to multiple writers who have worked there, used the story circle as an almost constant reference point, applying it simultaneously to the A-plot and the B-plot of each episode and checking that both were moving through the cycle in ways that complemented rather than undermined each other. What is interesting about the story circle's application to Rick and Morty specifically is that the show often uses the A-plot and B-plot to make the same argument from two completely different angles. The science fiction adventure will be exploring a theme, say the cost of genius or the impossibility of running from yourself, and the domestic subplot will be exploring the same theme through entirely mundane circumstances. When both threads resolve, they resolve into the same insight arrived at through different paths. This structural doubling, the show using two separate stories to triangulate a single emotional truth, is one of the reasons the show feels so dense and complete, even in episodes that seem light or standalone. Nothing is purely decorative. The circus and the drama are always working together. Fact 87. Rick and Morty, the anime, the 10-episode animated spin-off produced by Sola Entertainment and directed by Takashi Sano, premiered in 2024. Sano had previously directed 2 short anime films for the franchise, Rick and Morty vs. Genocider and Summer Meets God, Rick Meets Evil, both of which received widespread acclaim and over 10 million combined views when released on Adult Swim's digital platforms. The anime series was described by its creators as set in an alternate universe rather than being directly canonical to the main show, even though its main Rick is named Rick C-137 and shares events from the main continuity. This deliberate ambiguity is very much in keeping with the main show's own casual relationship with its own continuity. The anime also demonstrates something important about the global reach of Rick and Morty as a cultural artifact. A show that began as a deliberately crude parody, short made by 2 friends for a small film festival audience in Los Angeles, became, within a decade, something large enough to justify a full anime series produced in Japan with a separate creative team working in an entirely different visual tradition. The characters translated, the emotional core translated, the philosophical concerns about existence, meaning, and the specific pain of caring about people in a universe that does not care about you translated across language and visual grammar without losing their essential weight. This is the mark of something that found a real human truth, not just a genre formula. The original title of the anime series was Rick and Morty, Take Me to the Other Side, which was eventually repurposed as the title of the ending credits theme. The production took place while the main show's Lighthouse Studios partnership was already in full swing, meaning that at one point in 2024, different international teams in Ireland, Canada, and Japan were all simultaneously working on different chapters of the same universe. The franchise had become genuinely global in its production infrastructure while remaining singular in its voice. Few animated properties have achieved this balance. Section 9. Fan theories that turned out to be canon. There is a particular pleasure that Rick and Morty offers to its most attentive fans, a pleasure that very few shows can genuinely provide: the pleasure of being right. The show plants seeds with such patience and such craft that the people who tend them carefully, who track the small details across episodes and seasons, who build elaborate theories from the available evidence, occasionally find that the show has been building toward the same conclusion they had already reached on their own. This section is about those moments, the theories that the show eventually confirmed, the fans who were watching so carefully that they saw the end before it arrived. Fact 88. One of the most celebrated fan theories of the show's early run, the one proposing that Rick's catchphrase contained a hidden meaning about his inner emotional state, turned out to be exactly right. Fans had speculated from the earliest episodes that Rick's exuberant outward energy was a mask over genuine pain, and the revelation that "wooba looba dub dub" meant "I am in great pain, please help me" in bird person's language was the show explicitly confirming what attentive fans had intuited. The reveal was both earned and surprising in the best possible way. What made this particular confirmation so satisfying was that it came from Bird Person, the character who functions as Rick's emotional mirror and occasional conscience. Bird Person knows Rick better than almost anyone, and his delivery of the translation is characteristically calm and undramatic. He does not make a speech about it. He simply tells Morty what the words mean and lets Morty sit with that information. The reveal reframes not just the catchphrase, but Bird Person's entire relationship with Rick. He has known what Rick has been saying all along, and he has stayed anyway. He heard the plea and remained. That is what makes Bird Person's eventual fate, being shot at his own wedding and turned into a weapon, so devastating. Rick's only friend who truly heard him was taken from him in the cruelest possible way. Interestingly, for a period of time, if you typed the phrase into Google search, it would ask you, "Did you mean, 'I'm in great pain, please help me'?" The show had fully migrated into real life, so completely that the largest search engine on Earth was treating the translation as the default interpretation of the phrase. The fan community had embedded this knowledge so thoroughly into the internet's collective memory that Google's algorithms absorbed it as factual context. That is a remarkable level of cultural penetration for a piece of animated television lore. Fact 89. Fans had theorized for years before the Season 5 finale that the reason Rick needs Morty, the in-universe explanation about brainwave cancellation, was covering a deeper emotional truth: that Rick genuinely loves Morty and would not admit it. The show confirmed this gradually and then directly, culminating in moments across the later seasons where Rick's attachment to Morty is unmistakably the thing driving his behavior. The scientific justification for needing Morty was always real within the show's logic, but it was never the whole story, and the fan community was right to suspect there was more underneath it. The brainwave explanation is a perfect example of how the show uses its science fiction machinery to say things it would be too emotionally exposed to say directly. Rick needs Morty because their brainwaves cancel each other out. This is the official reason. It is the reason Rick would give if asked at, and it is stated with enough technical specificity to feel satisfying as an explanation. But the show has consistently undermined it across its run by showing us Rick making choices that go beyond the requirements of brainwave camouflage. He comforts Morty in moments when no one is watching. He makes sacrifices for Morty that serve no practical purpose. He stays when leaving would be easier. The brainwave story is true and insufficient simultaneously, which is exactly how people explain love when they are not ready to call it by its name. Fact 90. The theory that the show takes place primarily within a section of the multiverse that was artificially designed to favor Rick's dominance, which would explain why Rick's technology always functions, why his enemies always lose in the end, and why the universe seems structured to tell his story, was confirmed when the central finite curve was formally introduced. Everything within the curve is a Rick story. The universe behaves like a Rick story because it was built to be one. What makes this confirmation so conceptually rich is that it does something genuinely unusual for a television show. It suggests that the genre conventions of the show's own storytelling are explained by in-universe mechanics. Rick always wins because the curve ensures he operates in environments where he always wins. The narrative structure of the show is justified by the show's own lore. This is a kind of meta-commentary on storytelling itself, the show turning its genre conventions into plot devices, acknowledging the constructed nature of its own hero mythology while also explaining that construction as an act of villainy within the fiction. Rick did not just build a cosmic prison. He built the conditions that make his story the kind of story it is. He is the author of his own narrative dominance. The fan community had been circling this idea for years, noting that the show's universe seemed suspiciously friendly to Rick's particular brand of genius, that the universe's difficulty setting seemed calibrated to Rick rather than to random chance. The central finite curve was the answer they had been building toward without quite having all the pieces. When it was confirmed, it felt less like a plot twist and more like a validation of a collective intuition that had been forming for seasons. Fact 91. The early fan theory that there were two different Beths in the show by the time Season 3 ended, one who stayed and one who left with Rick's spaceship, was eventually confirmed in later seasons. Rick had indeed built Beth a clone and given her the choice of which life to live without actually confirming which version he told which answer. The question of which Beth is which, the real one and the clone, has never been definitively resolved by the show and may never be, but the basic fact of the split existence was confirmed. The ambiguity is the point. Rick gave Beth the choice, but then deliberately confused himself about the outcome so that he genuinely does not know which daughter he is living with. This is an act of profound love disguised as scientific procedure. Rick could not bear to know that he was living with the copy. He could not bear to know that the real Beth had left. So he removed the ability to know from both of them simultaneously, ensuring that whatever version of Beth he has in his life, he will always also have the uncertainty that makes her feel equally real and equally his daughter. He protected himself from grief by embracing permanent uncertainty. It is perhaps the most Rick solution to an emotional problem that the show has ever produced. The fan theory that this was the case developed remarkably quickly after the Season 3 episode where Rick presents the choice. Viewers noticed that the show never definitively confirmed which outcome had occurred, and that this absence of confirmation felt intentional rather than like an oversight. They were right. The deliberate ambiguity was baked into the episode's design from the beginning. A mystery with no intended resolution, sitting open in the middle of the show's mythology, like a door that has been left ajar so that no one has to decide whether to close it. Fact 92. Fans had speculated for years that Rick was not merely a self-destructive nihilist, but a man whose worldview was built on specific loss rather than abstract philosophy, that something had happened to him that was real and devastating. The eventual revelation of Rick Prime and the murder of Diane and the original Beth confirmed that Rick's nihilism is not a philosophical conclusion arrived at through thought. It is a scar. He decided the universe was meaningless because the most meaningful things he had were taken from him by an alternate version of himself. His philosophy is grief wearing the clothes of wisdom. This origin also reframes Rick's relationship with every version of Beth he has ever encountered. Every Beth he has met, including the Beth he has been living with for years, is not his daughter. His actual daughter died before she had the chance to grow up. The Beth he lives with is an alternate version, a stranger who shares his daughter's face and name and some of her qualities, but is not the person whose death shaped him. Rick moved in with this alternate Beth specifically because he was hunting Rick Prime, the person who killed the originals. He ended up caring about this substitute family not because he intended to, but because grief and proximity are powerful, and people who share your face have a particular access to the parts of you that you are trying to protect. The family he built is a replacement family. The love he developed for it is no less real for that. Fact 93. The theory that evil Morty had been present from season 1 and had a long-game plan that predated his first obvious appearance was confirmed over multiple seasons as more of his operation was revealed. His manipulation of evil Rick in season 1, his election campaign in season 3, his eventual escape in season 5, and his return in season 7 all revealed a continuous, patient, multi-year strategy that had been in motion since before most fans were even aware of the character's name. The patience of evil Morty's plan is genuinely staggering when laid out in sequence. He engineered control of a Rick. He used that Rick to kidnap other Ricks and extract information. He erased himself from the Citadel's records. He went into hiding. He ran for political office as a long-shot candidate that no one took seriously. He won. He spent time in office consolidating power and building the technological infrastructure for his escape. And he executed the escape with such efficiency that by the time anyone fully understood what was happening, it was already done. The entire plan from inception to execution may have taken decades of planning across multiple Rick and Morty seasons. And it was all in service of one goal: leaving. Not conquering. Not revenge. Just leaving. Getting out of a universe that was never designed to give him anything but servitude. The show makes evil Morty sympathetic without making him good, which is one of its great achievements. Fact 94. The fan theory that Doofus Rick, the most maligned and pitied variant of Rick in the multiverse, was actually happier than any other Rick because he lacked the intelligence and ego that made the others miserable, was quietly confirmed by the show through the introduction of Simple Rick and the lore surrounding the central finite curve. The Ricks within the curve are the smartest versions, but they are also the most isolated, the most emotionally damaged, and the most likely to be in genuine pain. The stupid, dismissed Ricks might be the lucky ones. The show suggests this with enough consistency that it is clearly intentional. There is a version of this idea that extends to the show's broader themes. Intelligence in Rick and Morty is almost never presented as an unambiguous gift. It is presented as something that costs the people who have it. Rick knows too much to be comforted by the things that comfort most people. He sees through every social performance and every emotional convenience. He cannot believe in things that give other people peace because he understands the mechanisms underneath them well enough to know they are constructions. His intelligence is his cage. The Ricks who do not have his intelligence, the ones the other Ricks mock and dismiss, are free of that cage. They can feel things without immediately understanding why those feelings are chemically meaningless. They can love without also cataloging the neurological processes involved. They are simply inside their lives in a way that Rick can only observe from outside. The show is consistently, quietly, asking whether being the smartest person alive is worth it. Fact 95. The theory that Rick's relationship with Morty is the emotional center of the show, the thing that all the nihilism and adventure is ultimately circling, was not really a theory so much as an observation that the show eventually stated directly. In the later seasons, Rick's love for Morty is presented not as a weakness he is hiding, or a sentiment he is using, but as the most real thing in his life. The adventures, the science, the drinking, the posturing about the meaninglessness of existence, all of it is context around a relationship that Rick would and has demonstrated he will move the universe to protect. What makes this most powerful is the specific way the show earned it. It did not declare Rick's love for Morty in a dramatic speech. It demonstrated it across hundreds of small moments, the way Rick sometimes pauses before leaving Morty in a dangerous situation, the way he occasionally chooses the worst outcome for himself to avoid the worst outcome for Morty. The way his most genuinely unguarded moments tend to be the ones when he thinks Morty cannot hear him. The love is not stated. It is the only explanation for a pattern of behavior that makes no other sense for a man who claims nothing matters. Rick has been quietly proving for 10 seasons that something does. There is also a beautiful structural irony in the fact that Rick's relationship with Morty began as a selfish calculation. Rick needed a Morty to cancel his brainwaves. He moved in with his daughter specifically to access her son for this purpose. The entire show started from a place of pure instrumental thinking, Rick using Morty as a tool. And the journey the show has taken from that starting point to a genuine, hard-won, complicated love between two people is one of the longest and most carefully constructed emotional arcs in the history of animated television. The tool became the person. The means became the meaning. That transformation is what the show is actually about. Section 10. The Final 5. Things that change how you watch the show. By now you have heard 95 facts. Some of them were trivia, the kind of knowledge that sharpens your appreciation of details you had previously let wash over you. Some of them were history, the real story of how something beloved came to exist. Some of them were structural secrets, the hidden architecture beneath the surface of episodes you have probably seen multiple times. And some of them were genuinely moving, facts that reframe the show's emotional content in ways that make it hit harder and sit heavier than it did before you knew them. These final 5 are the ones that operate at the deepest level. They are not hidden in backgrounds or encoded in reversed audio. They are embedded in the show's fundamental design, in the choices that were made before a single frame was animated or a single line was recorded. They are the things that explain why this show, of all the shows that have ever been made, has generated the kind of devotion and ongoing attention that it has. They are the reasons this video exists and the reasons you are still here listening. Fact 96. Every dimension in Rick and Morty has a designation, but the designation of the dimension we follow, C137, was not chosen arbitrarily. The use of alphanumeric designations for dimensions implies a cataloging system vast enough to require both letters and numbers, which gives a concrete sense of scale to the multiverse even before the show explicitly discusses it. 137 is also a number that has no special mathematical significance, which is itself significant. It was not chosen to be special. There is nothing cosmically meaningful about the dimension we happen to be following. We are watching C137 because Rick C137 ended up where the story needed to start. Any other dimensions Rick and Morty are equally real. Their stories are equally happening. We are just in this one. This randomness is the point. The show is constantly implying that the story we are being told is not special because it was chosen. It is special only because we are watching it. The people in it matter only because we have spent time with them. The dimension C137 is significant because we decided it was, which is maybe the same thing that makes anything significant. You choose where to pay attention, and the thing you attend to becomes real to you in a way that nothing else quite can. Rick and Morty is a show that takes this observation seriously enough to build a multiverse around it. Fact 97. The show's approach to death and consequence was established in its very first season and has remained consistent. Characters die, civilizations are destroyed, planets are rendered uninhabitable, children are traumatized. None of these outcomes are treated with the traditional animation solution of resetting to the status quo by the episode's end. The show accumulates its damage. Morty buries himself in a backyard. Beth might be a clone. Rick cannot fix what he did to Cronenberg Earth. The show's world is permanently and visibly shaped by the things that happen in it. This is deeply unusual in animated television, and it is one of the most important reasons why the show's emotional stakes feel real despite the absurdity of the setting. The Cronenberg dimension, the dimension that Rick destroyed and could not fix, has appeared in subsequent seasons as a recurring background detail. The family that Morty Prime and Summer left behind, the Smiths of the dimension where everyone is now a mutant, has been glimpsed occasionally in later episodes. Their sanity appears to have deteriorated. When Morty Prime returns to this dimension during the events of Season 3, the original family tries to kill him. They have been living in a world of monsters for what feels to them like years, and when someone from the before time shows up, they react with the particular violence of people who have been permanently broken by circumstances they did not understand and did not choose. The consequences of that Season 1 episode are still playing out. The show never forgot. Fact 98. The burp that Rick does in the middle of sentences, the interruption of coherent thought with a biological function that suggests something uncontrollable leaking through, is not just a gross-out comedy device. Roiland developed this quirk as an expression of the tension between Rick's genuine brilliance and his self-destructive tendencies. The smartest man in the universe cannot deliver a complete sentence without his body disrupting it. The burp is a reminder that even Rick's intelligence is housed in a body that is slowly deteriorating, that is making bad choices, that is leaking. It is the body refusing to be entirely subservient to the mind. The gross-out moment is also, in this reading, a philosophical statement. There is something additionally interesting about the origins of the burp. Justin Roiland has described it as partially inspired by the comedian Foster Brooks, who was famous in the 1970s for a character built around simulated drunkenness. Brooks would deliver entire comedy routines as a character who was struggling to maintain coherence through inebriation, and the humor came from the gap between the character's genuine attempts to be articulate and the alcohol's persistent interference with that articulateness. Rick's burp operates on similar territory. He is trying to say something. The body is getting in the way. The intelligence and the addiction are in constant negotiation, and the burp is the sound of that negotiation happening in real time. Fact 99. There is a scene at the very end of the episode, Rick Potion number 9, after Morty and Rick have buried their own dead bodies and moved into a replacement dimension, where Morty sits on the couch in the new house and stares at the wall while the new family's Christmas plays in front of him, and he is completely absent, completely somewhere else. This is the moment when the show reveals what it is actually doing beneath all the comedy. The adventure is over. The problem has been solved. The science worked. And a 14-year-old boy is sitting alone with the knowledge that he helped bury his own corpse in his backyard and is now living his own life as an imposter. There is no music. There is no resolution. Morty just sits there processing something that has no process, and the audience sits with him. This scene is often cited as the moment that audiences fully understood what Rick and Morty was going to be. The show had been funny and occasionally dark in its first 4 episodes. This was the first moment when the darkness was not funny. When something genuinely wrong had happened, genuinely difficult to integrate into any normal understanding of the world, and the show did not look away from it or resolve it with a joke. It sat in the discomfort with Morty. It let the audience sit there too. And in doing so, it earned the emotional investment that would make everything that followed in the series genuinely matter to millions of people. You cannot feel the genuine tenderness that later Rick and Morty moments produce without having first sat on that couch with Morty while the Christmas lights flickered and he stared at the wall. Fact 100. The most important Easter egg in Rick and Morty is not hidden in a background or encoded in reversed audio. It is in the opening moments of every episode. The show begins with a title card and a theme, and then it presents you with a family, a father and mother who are struggling, children who are trying to figure out who they are, a grandfather who is brilliant and broken and using one to hide the other. The whole show is a family drama wearing a science fiction costume. Every galaxy and every dimension and every alien and every impossible technology is in service of exploring the same question that families have always sat with. What do you do with someone who is extraordinary and damaged at the same time? What do you do when the person who is supposed to take care of you is also the person causing the harm? How do you love someone you cannot trust and cannot leave? That question is the heart of the show. It was there in the first episode, and it is still there in every episode since. That is the hidden thing the show never asks you to notice because it is too busy making you laugh. And then, when you are not expecting it, making you feel something you are not sure you have the words for. What makes this observation feel most true is the enormous range of people the show has reached. Fans of Rick and Morty are not a single demographic. They are teenagers and adults. They are people with difficult family histories and people with happy ones. They are scientists and artists and people who have never given much thought to quantum physics. They are people who are drawn to the comedy and people who are drawn to the melancholy. And what they share across all that variety is a recognition of something in the show that feels real. Not real in the sense of plausible or scientifically accurate, but real in the sense of true. The specific grief and love and frustration and hope that runs through the Smith household is not science fiction. It is just family. That is the final Easter egg, the one hiding in the most obvious place. The sci-fi show about portals and alien civilizations and the smartest man in the universe is actually about the oldest thing there is. It is about the people you did not choose but cannot leave behind. It is about the complicated debt of love. It is about the extraordinary and the ordinary being hopelessly entangled in the same person, at the same kitchen table, in the same cracked driveway of a house just outside Seattle. Take a long, slow breath. Let all of those images settle. The crack in the driveway that is still there. The photo of Doofus Rick in the background. The sound of a catchphrase carrying its hidden weight across every cheerful moment. The golden portal gun cutting through a wall that was built by grief. The boy sitting on the couch in someone else's life staring at nothing. This is one of those shows that gives back what you put in. And if you have been listening, you have put in quite a lot tonight. If any of these facts changed the way you think about the show, or if you want to see more of this kind of slow, thorough journey through the things we love, consider subscribing and leaving a comment about which fact hit you hardest. There are 100 more where these came from, and the universe is generous with its secrets to those who are patient enough to look. Sleep well. The multiverse is infinite and mostly fine. And somewhere out there in dimension C137 or in the quiet of a living room just outside Seattle, a cracked driveway is still waiting to be repaired. Nobody is going to fix it. It is just going to stay there, the permanent visible evidence of something that happened, marking the spot where the ordinary life met something impossible, and neither came away quite the same.